The long-awaited delivery of 18 Leopard 2 tanks from Germany has now arrived in Ukraine. The German Defense Ministry has confirmed the arrival of the Leopard 2 tanks, The Guardian reports. Previously, Germany announced at the end of January that it would provide advanced combat vehicles to Ukraine. The weapons assistance is part of an agreement between European Union countries that states it will contribute to sending 2 battalions of Leopard 2 and 31 M1A2 Abrams tanks from the US. The Germans promised 14 vehicles but increased that to 18 tanks to keep up with the Ukrainian battalion's size. Meanwhile, Portugal contributed 3 tanks and Sweden contributed 10. Poland has supplied Ukraine with a battalion of older Leopard 2A4 models. As promised, our tanks have arrived on time in the hands of our Ukrainian friends, said Boris Pistorius, Germany's defense minister, late Monday. I believe they can make a difference up front. The vehicle was handed over at the Ukrainian border at the end of last week, news magazine Der Spiegel reported. In addition, 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles and 2 tank recovery vehicles promised by Germany have also arrived in Ukraine. For security reasons, the German government did not comment on the route of delivery of the tanks. Ukraine only has a limited number of tanks from the Soviet or post-Soviet era. Ukraine says it urgently needs heavier armor for its defense against a Russian invasion. The German-made Kampfpanzer Leopard 2 is at the top of the list. Armed with a 120mm smoothbore gun and 2 7.62mm machine guns, this 1970s designed machine is the most popular tank in the NATO inventory. Leopard 2 has a speed of up to 42 miles per hour, efficient fuel, and the ability to shoot with high accuracy even when maneuvering in rough terrain. The tank is operated by a crew of 4, namely a commander, gunner, loader, and driver. About 2,000 Leopard 2 are in use by European countries. Over the past 2 months, Ukrainian soldiers have been training in the use of the complex weapon system of the A6 variant of the tank at a Bundeswehr site in Munster, Lower Saxony. Ukrainian soldiers have not only proven themselves highly motivated, but also capable of handling the technology and principles of deployment, the commander of the Bundeswehr, Bjorn Schulz, told Der Spiegel. Prior to confirmation of the arrival of the Leopard 2 tanks, Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokeswoman Irina Zolotár said the British-made Challenger 2 tanks are already in Ukraine. The defense minister, Alexei Reznikov, posted a picture of the Challenger 2 alongside other Western-made military vehicles on his Facebook page. He called the British vehicle a work of military art. Meanwhile, the UK Ministry of Defence declined to comment. But it confirmed the Ukrainian tank crew training in Britain had returned to their homes after completing training. President Zelensky visits Ukrainian soldiers on the Zaporizhzhia front. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, visited his frontline troops in Zaporizhzhia Oblast on Monday. President Zelensky's trip to Zaporizhzhia Oblast was an impromptu visit after last week's visits to the Kherson and Donetsk fronts, which are partly occupied by Russia. I am honored to be here today, beside our military, President Zelensky said on social media, posting a video of himself and Ukrainian soldiers. We will win for sure, he added, quoted by the Moscow Times. President Zelensky met with the military command, local officials and regional law enforcement leaders, discussing the readiness of military units, the socio-economic situation in the region and the needs of internally displaced persons. He also visited a local hospital, where injured Ukrainian soldiers were being treated. President Zelensky meets Rafael Grossi. President Zelensky during the visit met with soldiers and doctors and presented them with state awards, quoted from the Kyiv Independent. In addition, President Zelensky met with the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Rafael Grossi. President Zelensky and Rafael Grossi to discuss the protection of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia managed to take over the nuclear power plant in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast since 2022. I met Zelensky today in Zaporizhzhia city and discussed the protection of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its staff, wrote Rafael Grossi on Twitter. I reiterate the full support of the IAEA for Ukraine's nuclear facilities, he continued. During that visit, President Zelensky told Rafael Grossi, staff at the Zaporizhzhia factory were under constant pressure from Russian troops. Without the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and staff from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its adjoining areas, any initiative to restore nuclear safety and security is doomed to failure, President Zelensky said. In his speech that evening, President Zelensky discussed his meeting with Rafael Grossi. He said the threat remained high as long as Russian troops were in the region. To hold a nuclear power station hostage for more than a year, this must be the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of European or world nuclear power, he continued. The fighting near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has created the risk of a serious nuclear accident. Continuing fighting around the power plant and fears its cooling system could lose power have raised fears of a nuclear holocaust. Ukrainian army receives depleted uranium training from UK. Britain announced on Monday that Ukrainian troops trained in Challenger 2 tanks had completed their training period and returned home. The British Ministry of Defence released a documentary showing Ukrainians handling depleted uranium armor-piercing rounds. British instructors and at least one American officer seen in the British Ministry of Defence video appear to have spent weeks training Ukrainian soldiers how to become capable crews against main battle tanks. Quoted from the Russia Today page, Tuesday, Britain promised to deliver 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine, some of which have reportedly reached Ukraine. Meanwhile, the United States, US, has promised several M1 Abrams MBTs, and several NATO members have delivered German-made Leopards. All Western tanks required a crew of 4, including a manual loader, unlike the original Ukrainian T-64 and T-72 tank fleet, which carried a crew of 3. The loader has to handle standard NATO armor-piercing rounds made with depleted uranium rods. Note that this ammunition has been linked to skyrocketing rates of cancer and birth defects in the former Yugoslavia and Iraq. When the DU penetrator hits a target, it shatters and ignites, producing DU particulate matter, which is toxic and chemically radioactive, which poses an inhalation risk to humans, said Doug Weir, an expert with the Conflict and Environmental Observatory. In his opinion, this would be another burden for Ukraine in a conflict which has created a serious pollution problem. Weir identified the ammunition in the UK Ministry of Defence video as an inert display version of CHARM-3, the 120mm DU ammunition used by the British military. But Britain's Ministry of Defence said last week that it was unlikely the use of the depleted uranium munitions would have any impact on personal health or the environment. In an article published in The Spectator on Sunday, a fellow at the government-funded Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, think tank, Jack Watling, admits that DU is toxic. Russian soldiers must not sleep with depleted uranium bullets in their arms or lick the tip. Projectiles traveling at about 1,800 meters per second and burning in flight would be more worrisome to any target, Watling said. Britain announced last week it would ship DU ammunition to Ukraine along with Challengers. The Russian Foreign Ministry called the move a sign of absolute recklessness, irresponsibility, and impunity. The Russian military doesn't appear to be concerned about DU's potential effects in combat. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, who is in charge of the Russian nuclear, biological, and chemical defense forces, pointed out that DU dust will contaminate the soil and destroy Ukrainian agriculture for decades, as well as causing irreparable harm to the health of Ukrainian citizens, civilians, and military, Kirillov said.